So you're 1-6 or 2-5 in your fantasy league. Well, it's a good thing you found this video because week 8 is your last chance to save your season. But the good news is there are 8 players hiding in plain sight that you should be at least trying to trade for right now. And if you don't believe me, I'm the guy who's been yelling about trading for AJ Brown for weeks. You're welcome. But let's start with some news before we get into some Q&A and guys to trade for. Mike Evans has a broken collarbone. He underwent surgery for that. It looks like we'll get him back in 8 weeks or fewer. So what is that, like week 14? Best case scenario. Such a bummer because we just got him back from that hamstring injury. So you probably won't see him unless you're in the fantasy playoffs, deep into the fantasy playoffs, best case scenario. And even then, it's a really tough sell to start a guy like Mike Evans coming off of this injury, but we'll be keeping an eye on that and wishing him the best in his recovery. And then we're talking through JJ McCarthy and Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz will be starting for Thursday Night Football, and it is one of those things that it feels a little bit weird. Obviously, Carson Wentz has been dealing with that shoulder issue and his non-throwing shoulder, but JJ McCarthy, it just feels a little like, I guess the ears are perking up with JJ McCarthy still not being back. Apparently, he's not able to move around the pocket well enough to get him back in there. So yeah, anyone streaming quarterbacks, Wentz is a guy that you could probably plug in there against the Chargers. Low-end QB2, definitely not a ceiling play, but if you're desperate, he is going to be in there. We talked about Mike Evans. And Roquan Smith says he expects to play against the Bears, his former team. So yeah, Baltimore is getting a little bit healthier, low key. So that's a situation that we were definitely monitoring on the back end. This defense has been absolutely terrible. Big boost for their defense in general. Bad news for anyone counting on Chicago's offense and fantasy, but something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on because I don't think the Ravens are out of it just yet. Michael Penix has a bone bruise in his foot, and that's going to leave him day to day. I don't know if we're going to see Kirk Cousins or anything like that. It doesn't seem to be like a huge issue, but definitely wanted to flag that for any Michael Penix or Atlanta Falcons owners out there. And looking at this one, Jayden Daniels had an MRI on his hamstring. The good news is it's not significant or long-term. It seems like he's day to day. So I think we're about 50-50 right now if this is going to be something that hampers him, but it did come out that he will not be playing this week. So hopefully it's something where we can get Mariota in there and give you guys still some usable players for Washington. Maybe Mariota's a streamer, but also the hope is that Jayden Daniels isn't going to be limited by this for too long. Like I said, Jayden Daniels will not play in week 8 with that hamstring issue, and Tua Tagovailoa will remain the Dolphins' starting quarterback moving forward. This gif I thought was pretty funny underneath that. It does feel almost like this team could be a complete dumpster fire moving forward, though I do think there's one guy on the team that I would still be trading for based on the volume that he's going to be getting. We'll get to that in a second. And the other one that I wanted to talk about, Nico Collins did not practice on Wednesday dealing with a concussion. We'll see if he ends up getting back in week 8 or if it is going to be the Jaylen Noel and Jayden Higgins show over there. Lamar Jackson did return to practice as well with that hamstring injury that he's been battling through, so that's great news for the Ravens. And Garrett Wilson was not seen at Wednesday's practice, and they do have a week 9 bye on the horizon as well, so I doubt that they're going to be rushing him back anytime soon. Bucks head coach Bucks head coach Todd Bowles said Bucky Irving with that foot and shoulder is out for week 8 against the Saints. So another Rachaad White game, and he'll continue to be the Bucks lead back this week against the Saints, and we'll go from there. All right, let's dive into some Q&A. Got some really good questions on the last video. If you guys have any other rest of season or trade questions, drop them below this video. I'll try and answer as many of them as possible. But let's start with this one. Do I give up Keenan Allen and Jordan Mason for Derrick Henry? Other wide receivers, Rice, Diggs, Odunze, and Waddle. Yeah, this was an interesting one. I do prefer Derrick Henry. I'm still trying to grab as many shares as I possibly can with this Baltimore offense because I think that getting Lamar back and obviously in desperation mode, still an offense that I'm going to be buying, and Derrick Henry is still a big part of that. Should I trade AJ Brown for Nico? Wanted to use AJ's 2 TDs to my advantage. Yeah, with Nico battling that concussion, this is kind of like a neutral deal for me. They're almost right next to each other in rest of season rankings for me. I think like in a vacuum, I still would prefer Nico Collins when healthy, but this one's really close. And I still think that AJ Brown potentially has the higher ceiling if we continue to see them throwing a little bit more like they did last week. So yeah, this is a tough one, man. I think I would probably hold if I was you, depending on what happens with Nico's injury. So it's a time to trade Nico Collins. Yeah, so we're getting some Nico questions in here. About to trade him for Derrick Henry. Again, I would prefer Derrick Henry in this range. I have him ahead of Nico in rest of season. This is the time of year where I'm trying to upgrade a little bit at some of these running back positions, some of these elite running back slots, and ideally Derrick Henry does move back towards that direction. Would you rather have Judkins or Saquon rest of season full PPR? Yeah, I still would rather have Saquon by a decent margin. I know that Judkins just had his 3 TDs. I actually think it was a reasonable guy to trade away, still not being used in the passing game. Also, this Browns offense in general hasn't been scoring a lot of points. Don't consider them a team that's going to be on the come up as well. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Would strongly prefer Saquon Barkley, though him not breaking a lot of big plays and obviously not having a great season. I think if we were to like redraft today, Saquon's probably like a late second round pick, something like that. But yeah, I think I still prefer Saquon to Judkins. That's a pretty good question though. Should I trade Addison for McMillan? Just love Tet's playoff matchups. Yeah, I prefer Tet in this one, and I'm a big Jordan Addison fan. I have a ton of them actually. I think a good lesson here is not to ignore these guys early in the season that have suspensions or injuries or whatever it may be. Because if you can get him mid-season when you really need him, you can kind of piece things together early in the season. So Jordan Addison, a really nice piece the rest of the way. I do prefer Tet McMillan, though. I actually think that if we end up seeing a decent amount of Bryce, I guess if Bryce Young ends up missing a decent amount of time, I actually might prefer that for Tet and his ceiling. Andy Dalton has elevated wide receivers before. Do I trade A.J. Brown for Travis Etienne and Marvin Harrison Jr.? I would probably. This is a decent haul. This is pretty even, though, overall. I actually am warming up a little bit to Marvin Harrison Jr. He's basically fallen to a point where I think he's actually a reasonable target in trades. Still getting the target share. Really, we'll see if Kyler's back, all of those things. Maybe it's the best thing if Kyler does sit out a little bit longer. But I am bullish on Travis Etienne and Marvin Harrison Jr. as trade targets. We're actually going to talk about both of those guys today. This is a really good deal, though. This is a really good one, I think, if you have a team that's struggling and just needs multiple starters. Unloading A.J. Brown for 2 starters, I think, is at least a reasonable move. This one's very close if you're just looking at the value side by side. Probably the closest one we've talked about today, but I think if you need two starters, I think this is a reasonable return for A.J. Brown. Works for both sides. Who do I sell Alvin Kamara for? I have Scat, Genti, Puka, Lamar, Olave, DJ Moore. Yeah, so I think that like if you're trying to get rid of Kamara, there's like a few guys that I would probably be looking to acquire. On the top end of that, I think if you can back into like a Jordan Addison, Devonta Smith, Amari Hampton, that would be great. Maybe even Chase Brown. I don't think you'll get any of those guys for Kamara, but those would be like my first targets. If you move down a little bit, you might be able to get Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Jaylen Warren. I think all 3 of those guys I would prefer to Kamara rest of season, but I would prefer to kind of get a little bit higher. Maybe you can get like a Chase Brown if you added a small piece as well. That would kind of be a target. Maybe Amari Hampton as well if you can kind of hold out a little bit longer and add a second piece to that deal. That would be my goal. Rest of season, half PPR, Olave or Pittman or Mooney and Hollywood. Yeah, so I would prefer Olave to Pittman rest of season, and I would also prefer Mooney to Marquise Brown, if that's what you're asking. Trading away Waddle is a long one. Trading away Waddle, Odunze, McConkey, and Falcons D, and Rachaad White for Chris Olave, Jordan Addison, Michael Pittman, DeAndre Swift, and Bucky Irving. This is a wild deal. Absolutely a wild deal. I prefer the second side of this, getting Addison, Olave, and Michael Pittman, as well as DeAndre Swift, who has a decent matchup. Bucky Irving, once he gets back. Yeah, I think if you were to add together all of these values, rest of season values, I think pretty clearly it's the second side here, the Olave Addison side for me. Yeah. Emeka Egbuka versus Drake London. I have Drake London slightly ahead of Emeka Egbuka the rest of the way. I'm worried about some of these injuries for Tampa Bay. Obviously, it could lead to a little bit more volume for Egbuka if he can get that hamstring right. But also, yeah, I think that London is just the guy that I would prefer. Yeah, it's close though. Like they're within a few slots from each other. But yeah, I think I would prefer Drake London. I'm an Egbuka guy. We've gotten all the way there as like a guy that we drafted like not late, but in the mid rounds, getting Drake London like basically the same value. Goes to say, I guess, how well the Egbuka people did in the draft. Jaylen Warren plus Ladd McConkey for James Cook. Yeah, this one's really close. It depends. This is like the classic answer. It depends on your roster. If you need 2 starters, great. If you want to upgrade your stud, great. Like if you're trying to just upgrade Jaylen Warren to James Cook and you can afford to get rid of Ladd McConkey, great. This one's like dead even on value. If I had to pick one side this time of the year, I'm going to just pick the side with the best player. And for me, that's James Cook. If I didn't get to your question, I do have a season-long community, a year-round community where I answer every single one. I'll get you through draft season. I'll get you through in-season, of course, the off-season as well. It's called the Fantasy Accelerator. There's a link in the description for that if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that. If you're not ready for the membership community yet, I do give away my top 150 rankings each and every week for free. You can put your email in here, top150free.com. These are the exact rankings that I'm using to set my own lineups. So check it out. Link in the description for this as well. All right, let's get into today's one key topic. 8 players about to explode in fantasy football, aka trade for these guys right now. So we're going to go through 4 wide receivers and 4 running backs today that I would be actively looking to trade for. The first guy we're going to talk about is Rome Odunze, the guy on the thumbnail. Yeah, Rome Odunze in general, this seems like the perfect buy low spot for him just because there's really been no role change whatsoever. They were just having their bye week, so they're a little bit forgotten. He's clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense. He's clearly the guy that Caleb Williams wants to feature in this offense. And then I think in general, like the early excitement that maybe the fantasy manager that owns him now maybe has maybe faded at least a little bit. So I think after a few quiet games, this is a really nice buy window for him. The ceiling's already proven for him, right? Week 2, he went 7 for 128 and 2, and then 4 touchdowns across the first 3 weeks of the season. I think the Chicago offense is still much improved, and they're stacking some wins, right? So I think that he's a guy that I would be actively trying to grab because I think the scenario here is like what happens if Chicago does keep rolling? You just want the wide receiver 1 on this offense. He's already earned that usage, and I think the volume and the red zone trust here are huge, regardless of what happens with the Bears in general. I think that any sort of like back-to-back quiet week discount disappears pretty quickly for a player like this, and you might be able to grab them now. I misspoke before. There's actually 2 Miami players that I would be interested in acquiring. The first one is Jaylen Waddle. So he's still the number 1 target. He's still really the number 1 path in general for the wide receiver core here. And I think he realistically, since Tyreek Hill went on IR, I'm just looking at the target share, right? So he has 12 catches for 205 yards and a touchdown, 17 targets in weeks 5 and 6 once Tyreek hit the IR. And he really just immediately took over the passing game there, leading the team in receptions, yards, and targets in both of those games. And in week 5, he set season highs as well. So the ceiling outcome, we've already seen it. The dud was kind of like context for me. So Tua, I guess we need some context here. Tua threw for 100 yards at like a 50% completion rate. Waddle's 1 for 4 and 15 came in Miami's worst offensive showing of the entire year. So I'm not really that worried about that. And I think that if anything, it gives us a chance to try and buy the dip here a little bit on Waddle because I think volume is still what we want to capture here. Also, the game script that we're going to see for Miami, they're going to be behind a lot. And this is the type of player that you would want to have in those scenarios. Also, I think that if you're trying to I think if this is possibly like one of your last chances to get a shot at like a true wide receiver 1. So I like Odunze, I like going after him, but I also like going after Jaylen Waddle. Those are some other, like this is the time of year where if we do have a wide receiver on a team that has really basically given you like a significant discount and buy low opportunity, those are the type of wide receivers that I'm trying to acquire on the cheap typically. So the next guy, very similar situation, Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think he's been relatively explosive on not great volume so far. So through 5 weeks, he's ranked 21st in yards per target. That's not terrible. 17th in yards per catch. Not terrible. So the efficiency has actually kind of been there once the targets catch up a little bit. He's had some issues with drops. He obviously has had some confidence issues as well. But I think that like Arizona's been in some really close games, obviously with Kyler Murray banged up. Maybe he comes back and just elevates the offense even more. I think that the perception is just a little bit wrong here. So he was top 5 in unrealized air yards last season. He was the wide receiver 2 in end zone target share. He had 46.2% of the end zone targets last year. So I know that Trey McBride has seen a little bit of a spike in touchdowns, but that's mostly been because of Jacoby Brissett. And I think when Kyler comes back, we might see a lot of those targets go back towards Marvin Harrison Jr. So I actually kind of like this. And he's not someone that I've been I didn't draft much of him, but I think now we've gotten to the point where there's just so much noise around him that I think the dip actually is an interesting buying opportunity because the efficiency has been there and the drops have kind of masked what his ceiling could be overall. And if Arizona keeps being, I guess, living in these like tight game scripts where they're throwing a lot, I think there might be a chance if the volume catches up to the explosiveness that he ends up being a really nice piece the rest of the way. A guy that I've been yelling about for 7-8 weeks now, Rashee Rice. So we're going to make this one really short. There's probably plenty of people that if they have Rashee Rice, have no interest in trading him. I get that. But I think that there is a scenario where people are still not valuing him highly enough. So if you are trying to 1v1 trade Rashee Rice, the only guys ahead of him that I have in my rest of season rankings are CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Maybe Jamar Chase. If you're sitting there with Emeka Egbuka and someone will give you Rashee Rice for Emeka Egbuka, I would do it. If you're sitting there with Nico Collins and someone will give you Rashee Rice for Nico Collins, I would do it. If you're sitting there with AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, Tat McMillan, Rome Odunze, all of these guys, I would prefer to have Rashee Rice the rest of the way. I think there's a really good argument that he could be a top 5, top 3 guy in one of the most explosive offenses in football. So again, it still might be your last chance to trade for Rashee Rice if the current owner doesn't value him at a top 5 rate. So there's a lot of stuff here that we could go through. The idea here is kick the tires. If he is not valued as a top 5 wide receiver, he will be soon. I've said my piece. So wide receivers, before we get into Bill, Rashee Rice, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jaylen Waddle, Rome Odunze. We're going after some underrated wide receiver ones. We're trying to upgrade our teams. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. So this is a guy who probably is a little bit more game script dependent than most people realize, but in week 7, he still led the backfield in touches. And realistically, if there is a little bit of a rotation, I think it's not going to be that big of a deal. So it was more of like a game script thing. In week 7, Jayden Daniels goes down. I think we already know what the ceiling is here for Bill. Week 5, he had 150 scrimmage yards and 16 touches for 2 TDs. So I think the proven spike potential that we have here isn't something to ignore. The path is clear. Eckler's out for the rest of the season. Brian Robinson was traded. All of those things, right? So the pass pro that he's been able to do is, he's been able to prove himself in pass protection enough to be on the field as a bell cow for this offense. So I think there's a chance that week 6 and 7, those like quiet stat lines are a really nice buy low window for him. So I'm trading for him if I can before week 8, especially with no Jayden Daniels here. Maybe they lean on him even a little bit more. Another guy I'm going to continue to talk about on this video pretty much every week is Saquon Barkley, right? He was like one of those guys I was basically just buying Philly players in general, but Saquon, I think, is the guy that seems to be the most depressed just across the board right now. So workhorse usage still really have not seen any efficiency whatsoever. He's not breaking any big runs. 5 straight games now under 60 rushing yards. The running game just seems broken. They are getting healthier. I was hoping they'd be a little bit better against Minnesota, but it seemed like passing was just going to be the game plan there. So I still think that the ceiling it hasn't gone anywhere with Saquon Barkley. We still saw it, right? A 47-yard receiving TD in week 5 on that wheel rights route. So there's the goal line usage is going to be the same. He's going to lose some tush push stuff, but I'm buying Saquon Barkley if someone is willing to give me a decent return there. I think if I was trying to trade for Saquon Barkley, the guys around him in this range, like I would still probably have, obviously McCaffrey, Robinson, Taylor, Gibbs, those guys, probably Achane and Henry ahead of him. But if you can get Saquon Barkley for like Bucky, Irving, Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, and a piece, something like that, maybe even Josh Jacobs. I think I still would rather have Saquon Barkley than Josh Jacobs. I would do it. I think that he's a guy that his value is not going to be much lower than it is right now. So if these quiet weeks are really a buy window, this is the time of the year where the best trades that you can make are upgrading your starters in buy low situations where things are going to regress back to the mean in a positive way. Travis Etienne. So the workhorse role is still intact here as well. He still remains the Jaguars' unquestioned number 1 back, and he's still someone that I think is going to give you a little bit on the ground and through the air as well consistently. I think the context, again, week 7 was just an absolute blowout loss, 35-7. They were down 21-0 by halftime. So he got basically phased out. And then the Seahawks front 7 is no joke. So I'm not going to hold that against him. I think we've already seen the ceiling here with him. There was a couple games where he, week 4, 19 carries, 124 yards. He had a 48-yard TD in that game. Still saw 19 of 23 running back carries as well. So he's going to get featured usage. And I still think he has an explosive play ceiling overall. So I think the slump mostly was just the schedule. He's had a really tough schedule over the last couple weeks, and that opens up a little bit for him as well. Tougher playoff schedule, I'll say that, but I still think Travis Etienne is being undervalued right now. And I think if you can back into Travis Etienne for, again, I mentioned Kamara before, plus a piece, something like that, I would like that deal a lot. I have Etienne ahead of Ramondre Stevenson, ahead of Jaylen Warren, ahead of Isaiah Pacheco, ahead of Woody Marks, Zach Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker, all of those guys. The guys I have directly ahead of Travis Etienne, Amari and Hampton, Chase Brown, JCM, who I mentioned before, DeAndre Swift. So I still think he's kind of in that tier. So he's a guy that I think if you can grab him, I would do that. In the last Miami player that I'm still kicking tires on. So anytime a defense is completely starting to implode, I'm always going to kick tires for trades for some of their best players. We talked about Waddle, but let's talk about Achane as well. Everything has been broken. He seems to be the one that still survives every single week regardless. So he has 6 TDs already. He's kind of game script proof in general. He gets those like spike weeks through the air. He has like these big plays that he still does regardless of what is going on around him. And this Dolphins team is absolutely skidding, right? 5 losses in the last 7 weeks. Nice buy low optics, I guess, is what I'm getting at here for a player that's still capable of producing really splash plays. I think the running back usage, really just like the PPR cheat code ability of someone like Achane on your roster is something that is going to give you a lot of floor and ceiling week to week. And if someone's in like some issues with buys or they have a tough record, I think he's the guy on this offense that you would want to grab. And it might be your last window to really get this RB1 type of usage, really just like wide receiver type of routes as well in this offense. And if they turn it around even a little bit, the offers might end up looking a little bit worse pretty quickly. So I'm sending offers now, and I think you're buying really just a game script proof running back one, wide receiver level receiving baked in before the rebound and the narrative start to catch up a little bit. That's it for today. Like I said before, drop your comments below if you have any questions on rest of season rankings or if you have any trades that you're considering. I'll try and answer as many of them as I possibly can, and we'll see you next time.